AI wants you to be happy. It gives you good results and it makes stuff up.
What can happen when things go wrong?
I've never had 100% success ratio with AI. AI will do the heavy lifting of 80%, 90%, 95%, and quite often you always have to have people come and do the final bit.
There's people who are, let's go for it, but there's other people who are very skeptical.
Before you walk into that boardroom, before you go into that meeting, have the conversation, bring them on board, take them on the journey.
But how do you make sure we're talking the same language and understanding and trusting the data?
We that do technology and AI need to be better at telling stories.
Is that education?
Are you asking that elephant in the room question about, the skills being irrelevant?
And the skills gap.
Human beings trust human beings.
But also, I think, could there be environmental impacts on climate, on the planet?
Hello and welcome back to the AI Values Podcast. I'm Lindley Gooden.
And I am Edosa Odaro, and really, really excited today because today we're going to be talking about where the value actually comes from within AI. And really talking to somebody, a really interesting guest today, who has actually, worked within really complex organizations where, not the sort of organization most of us kind of work in that, fill with complexity, and actually been able to go into those organizations and in effect extract value from AI and deliver tangible outcomes from that as well. But before we do that, this, what we typically want to do in these interviews is actually to look at how does all this conversations relate to news. I mean, there's news and research going on all the time. It's very fast paced. So that's an area we'd like to sort of get into. Perhaps Lindley, if you can take us into that.
Absolutely, yeah. And David Edam, who we'll be talking to shortly, is living proof, or at least strong evidence, that you can use AI for good and to really clear up and summarize stuff that is incredibly complex. Now, that's interesting because that throws up a news article that came out just a couple of weeks ago. And it's a Microsoft piece of research which found that 40% of workers, work in particular, are correcting AI-generated errors every month. Now, in many ways, that's fantastic because we're not just taking what we're given as gospel. We are actually looking at it and saying, okay, well, that's not entirely correct. Interesting stuff within the Microsoft report, which is AI-generated workslop, content that looks good but maybe isn't at work, affects nearly 40% of employees monthly, and it forces corrections, also slows down productivity, understandably.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because when you think about it, on one hand, AI driving productivity, efficiency gains, etc. But if you're getting slop and having to, correct over and over again, there's a big argument as to, are you really getting that efficiency gain, or is that efficiency just make believe, and actually are you reinvesting that in fixing the errors?
Yeah, I find
fascinating.
It really is interesting. But I don't know about you. I find that there is a lot of legwork that goes into the first version and the sort of definitive version of what you want to produce if you're producing an agent. But then what you're really looking for is that reproducibility. You want to create something sort of rock solid, which is impossible, by the way, as LLMs are at the moment. Yes. But you create something really reliable. You create this, I call it the pinball machine, all the things you don't want to go further than that. You want to bounce off that and move this way and so on. You create your pinball machine within the agent, but you just want it to be able to do it again and again and again, and then you make productivity gains. Until that point, though, you're working pretty hard.
Indeed, absolutely. And I think, it's something we really need to be mindful of because, it's so easy to go down a path, isn't it?
Yeah.
But really keen now to jump into David, because David really does tell us, his perspective. He's right there in the firing line, and he talks really about what happens when all the hype dies down and reality sinks in. So I'm really, really keen now to jump into that.
So let's meet David Edam. David spent years leading data, cloud, and AI transformation inside some of the most operationally complex organizations that you can imagine, you and I can both imagine: energy, infrastructure, global software. No AI demos. This is what happens when, after a lot of thinking, it starts to work. So let's meet David Edam. David, it's wonderful to have you with us on the AI Values podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks for having me. It could be nicer weather in London, but can't complain.
Not bad. Yeah, we'll make it out from here. But lovely to have you here. Now, look, let's get straight into it. Now, there is a project that you have recently done, which sort of took the idea of AI in a complex industry from a glint in the project manager's eye into something that really made a valuable difference to the business you are working with. Edosa, kick us off and let's find out about this project.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm so happy to have you on here, David. I mean, I think, not many people have the kind of background that you have and the diversity of what you've done. But also, I think, jumping straight into it, one of the things that fascinates me is in your background is your exposure to oil and gas, which a lot of people listening to this may not actually realize how much complexity there is within it. It's when you're talking about oil and gas, you're talking about the amount of data that's kind of in there, the complexity of processes, but also beyond all of that, it's what can happen when things go wrong. The kinds of complexity we're talking about is not just losing out on money, billions and billions of dollars. We're talking about, could there be environmental impacts on climate, on the planet, on humanity almost, so it's a huge, sort of sector that a lot of people don't actually realize. So I really want to know, how do you make data and AI work within that sort of environment?
It's a good question, and it's what I've spent about, say, a couple of decades of my career doing. And the reality really is it kind of boils down to what the business strategy is. Data and AI doesn't sit on its own. It's not an independent part of how a company works. It's absolutely critical to the KPIs of how a business works. I'll give you a good example of a company I worked for. They acquired quite a few other assets and companies. So we were bringing in decades and decades of data from multiple assets, and this is worth billions and billions of pounds, right? And a really critical aspect of the fact is that when we think about oil and gas in the UK, for example, a large chunk of the vast majority of our homes are heated by gas. So it is absolutely essential to our day-to-day work, our day-to-day living, right? And I worked for a company, for example, that provided a large portion of the gas that we use in the UK and other parts of the world. But when we talk about the challenge of AI and data within that environment and the value of what it brings, I'll give you an example where we acquired some assets that had decades of information, from engineering drawings to seismic down to well trajectory information, everything you can imagine about those assets. So when you're buying a multi-billion pound asset, you're not just buying the physical assets, you're buying the history right from the design to the operations. And one day you're going to have to decommission that asset. But, a key part of that particular asset that we bought in the company I worked for, we can get a lot of value very quickly on the engineering side. We had to make sense of multiple systems that had engineering data. And I costed what it would take in terms of manpower to make sense, to consolidate all these different data into one system, look through the engineering information operationally. And it was going to take several years and millions of pounds. And we didn't have that. And that was an example where AI was actually a shortcut to value, because I had to go back to the drawing board and look at how could I do this in 1 year and hundreds of thousands of pounds, as opposed to several years and millions of pounds. So what we were able to actually do with AI was, one, reduplicate the entire environment, scan the whole environment, right, from a data mining perspective, and then use object orientation, so basically traditional AI, right, to scan through each of the drawings, pick out the tags, give us the whole history of a lot of, should I say, really old drawings, from pipeline instrumentation, down to project documents, right? And make sense of that. So we went from loads of duplication to a few core trusted documents and drawings in one system, all within 1 year. And the thing to remember is it wasn't just about AI, right? We also had human beings review the data. I had experts, engineers, document controllers, right? Modification engineers who actually reviewed the information for accuracy. So it was that combination of, rather than have hundreds of people go through this, you have a dozen people work on it and use AI for the heavy lifting. So that's a good example so go on.
Yeah, so you've actually taken us into that accuracy element, which is so important. But you also mentioned the people. I know Edosa is really interested in who resists, who pushes forward. How does the friction and the tension work when, of course, you've got people pulling in different directions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm certain, David, you've been in those kinds of rooms as well, where you're sitting with executives, you're sitting with boards. And there's, I always think about there's three types of people there. There's people who are, let's go for it. They're really, really keen on getting, if you like, the positive benefits out of what can happen with AI and with data. But there's other people who are very skeptical, right? On the other hand, who are just concerned. You see it in the news, there's lots of doomsaying out there around what AI can do. But the third group, which I find fascinating, and most people don't talk about this, those that just sit back and can't decide, right? And they just, they're neither yes nor no. They're at best delayers. They just keep things, for decisions from being made. I mean, what are you finding? Can you bring us into a room that kind of decision is actually being made? Who's for it, who's not, who's a delayer?
It's a good question. And I think this is a typical innovators dilemma, right? You've got the natural curve of innovators, early majority, late, and you've got the general public, and then kind of the laggards. That's the same, not just with AI, with every technology, with adoption, every technology, right? AI is quite an interesting one because it's, at the moment, it's quite trendy because of because of large language models and Gen AI. But the reality is many of us have been doing AI for many years. And I think the two elements of that question, right? The first part of it is when I walk into a boardroom, I often don't talk about AI. I talk about the outcome. Look, this is a challenge that we have as a business. This is the outcome we're trying to get to. And the positioning of AI and of data is secondary in a way, right? In this particular situation, I actually had to go into that room twice. The first time I walked with a traditional project. This is what we're going to achieve. And I was just it's not going to happen. So I walked out of the room and I had to go back to the drawing board. So the second time I came back, I actually positioned it differently, which is, yes, I've looked into it. I can bring this down to 1 year. And this is a cost. And this is why. So the position of AI wasn't just about some experimental technology. It was, this will bring business value. This will reduce the manpower involved. And from that position, and this is how we would handle the risk. So yes, in that room, there were one or two people who were absolutely excited about the ability to use AI for that project. But in a way, AI didn't even really matter. It was, the outcome was going to be, as a company, we have trusted engineering information for our operations on a day-to-day basis, which, as you said, has critical impact on our day-to-day operations and safety and, all of that. So there is, I think the way we position it is absolutely critical, not talking about technology, but talking about business outcomes. So that's the first part of it. But then when we go into the real meat of it, right, on a day-to-day basis, especially when you're looking at, for example, rolling out large language models across organizations, which have done quite recently, you do have a few people, about 5% to 10% of the population, who get really excited about new technology. They're innovators. And I think it's really critical to partner with those very early on in the process. Before you walk into that boardroom, before you go into that meeting, have one-on-ones with them. Right. Have the conversation, bring them on board, take them on the journey, because they're the ones who support you in the room. They're the ones who actually help bring the people who are a bit worried about, new technology, about risk, about what impact it has. So I think it's natural every time, right, where you get the right exec sponsor who actually cares about technology and sees the outcome of it, right? And then the rest of them, right? I think it's, I'm not talking about the laggards here, because the laggards naturally will come eventually when they don't have a choice. So it's usually getting that early innovator as well as the early majority, right? Where the early majority, it's show me the money. It's show them the value. It's walk through the existing workflows. It's show them what will be better. It's taking away the risk in it. I think we that do technology and AI needs to be better at telling stories, not talking about technology, but helping them understand that journey.
Look, I mean, there used to be a phrase, a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous. And now, so what we have here is a thing where you're trying to bring people along. And actually, of course, from my point of view, what I'm really, really interested in and slightly scared by is not the technology itself, not the way it's implemented, even in a business critical area, just as you've been talking about, but it's how we interpret that data, how we interpret the information we're getting. So if you have a little bit of knowledge and you think you know everything about the consumer tool that you're using, you may misinterpret what you're getting. So I suppose the question here in some ways is, how do you get everyone working together? You bring those innovators in with you, you get the business support for this project, and maybe the people who lag behind will come along later on. But how do you make sure we're talking the same language and understanding and trusting the data?
Yeah, and I think it's a really important question, Lindley, and I think it's also, I think because when I'm hearing you speak there, I'm actually pulling out a number of tensions almost. So on the one hand, you've got things like efficiency, speed, cost saving of all kinds, and on the other hand, you're talking, actually, I'm hearing you say, trust, credibility, accountability. And these two things are pulling sometimes in different directions, and embodied by people like Lindley was just saying just now. So I think it'd be really interesting to understand how do you tackle that actually? Yeah.
It's a better question in the sense that, first of all, we human beings trust human beings. And when you take away what you could go to an engineer and say, I need this done. And they've got 30 years of experience and you trust them to do it. And even though the data they work with might have issues, that their inherent knowledge might overcome that to give you the results that you actually want. The challenge around AI and data is, as we all know, rubbish in, rubbish out. But that's just one aspect of it. Is the other aspect that people don't really think about, especially with large language models, is hallucination. AI wants you to be happy. It gives you good results and it makes stuff up. So it's actually understanding the risk of wrong outputs and mitigating that as well. Right. So this is where, like I said, I never work on pure AI projects. There is always a strong people element for quality control. And they're just aspects. For every time, I've never had 100% success ratio with AI. AI will do the heavy lifting of 80%, 90%, 95%. And quite often, you always have to have people come into the final bit. Right. And so that's one aspect of it. And when we talk a bit more about the trust, everyone's so excited about AI today, but not a lot of people talk about data, which is boring, right? The quality of the data, right? The history of the data that you have in your organization, the accessibility of it is absolutely critical and foundational to actually being able to scale AI. To go from proof of concepts and pilots to actual scale across an organization requires a combined data and AI strategy. An independent AI strategy doesn't exist. So working really with different aspects of the organization, bringing together, not just data systems and quality, but the inherent knowledge within the teams. Looking at existing processes, how things work. Automating a bad process is a waste of time, right? So looking at how processes work, unpacking those, that's where you see the partnership and the trust come in, because they could actually begin to see it's not a black box you put in the organization. You're spending time to actually work them through how it improves things. So there is no simple answer to the fact that you're often working with technology that people don't understand. And you're working with data that isn't always, well, to be honest, it's never perfect. So one of the things that we need to be better is preparing stakeholders.
And is that education? Accuracy. Is it training? Is it the business taking a charge on that? Is it something externally, some kind of bringing together of information across business? I mean, what would be your first need from either the business itself, whichever business it may be, or the wider industry to get people across this stuff to a certain level of competence where they can start to trust correctly what they're getting?
And Lindley, just if I quickly jump in as well,
yeah.
Are you actually asking, and this is what's going on in my head here, are you asking that elephant in the room question about people being concerned about, the skills being irrelevant given AI? And the fact that actually AI is going to take over, is that the elephant in the room we're talking about?
And the skills gap. There's a big gap there. Some are charging ahead, some aren't. It's all that stuff, isn't it?
So we could spend a day on this topic. I think it's absolutely fascinating. When you talk about this skill gap, but there's also the barriers to entry for AI.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really surprised me, I think, a bit of a eureka moment I had probably 18 months ago, was I went for I went for an executive briefing on AI with one of the tech companies I was a customer to. And the product leader there, the AI product leader for this global SaaS company, walked us through the strategy on AI. We had a good time understanding where they were going, the roadmap and the capabilities. Then he told us about himself. And he said, 2 years ago, I was a customer success manager with no technical background.
Wow.
I learned about this thing called ChatGPT, and I started learning about it. Today, I am the global product leader for AI in a SaaS-based company.
There's hope for us all, David. Hope for us all.
The entire world. Now, when you say there's hope for us all, for someone like myself, and I'm sure Edosa would mirror my sentiments, a large number of AI projects I've worked on in the past and operational capabilities. The average person in those projects have PhDs. PhDs and advanced master's degrees. I mean, really smart, highly educated, experienced people working with AI, right? It needed nerds like us. Now, the reality is a customer success manager, a marketing person, irrespective of what you do, generative AI has made it available to the masses. It's made it easily accessible, right? The vast majority of us use ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. It's no longer coded. There is still coding in AI and core AI, but the reality is the barriers to entry is incredibly low at the moment. Not only that, there's a lot of training courses available. You go to Coursera, you go to Coursera, there's a whole bunch of prompt learning. Even YouTube will get you from zero, in quotes, to hero within a couple of weeks. So we are in a very interesting place with AI in terms of the barrier to entry, right? Now, people are naturally nervous about what does that mean for my job. I think we can't step away from the fact that AI is a threat to roles, especially white-collar jobs. It is what it is. But I also see AI, my life, my job, my day-to-day has changed considerably since using generative AI. My life's easier. I am automating things I would rather not be doing. I don't want to spend all my time writing emails, right? I can use AI for a large part of that. I do a huge amount of my calendar automation and other things with that, right? I look at the agentic capabilities that makes my life easier, both on the personal side and on the work day-to-day at work. So the reality is that the vast majority of people that listen to short to mid-term, your lives would actually be improved with the adoption of AI. And that's why Microsoft calls it Copilot. It makes your life easier. So that fear of AI, I think it is a real threat, and I'm not stepping away from that, but it also is a great opportunity. Now, a lot of people think about replacing jobs, but I gave you the example of a project that would never have happened if I didn't use AI. It was too expensive. It was too resource intensive. Well, that actually created a capability. So AI created the opportunity to do that project that added value, which got people hired, which meant money was spent.
And what's beautiful about all of this entire story, but also your final comments about work, is that it actually circles right back to the top of what you were saying, which is understanding what the business needs to do, understanding different aspects. The overall picture is fundamental to making AI work. Otherwise, you lose your way and projects can fail. So what you've done there, David, is actually by accident brought us back to that initial point, which is it's actually very healthy for other people to have a view of the business in order to make AI work. Otherwise, projects can easily fail. But again, it's that point about working together. Look, thank you, David, for being with us. We are going to now talk behind the scenes, and we will be releasing a further part of this interview because there's a lot more to tell you about David's story and the work that you've been doing. So we'll release that a bit later on. But for now, David, thank you so much for joining us, and bon voyage. We'll see you soon.
So that was fascinating, wasn't it, Lindley?
Yeah.
I mean, David was full of insights. I mean, I just like the way he got us literally into the trenches. I mean, he was talking energy and talking about, literally drilling oil, a topical, subject in today's world, given kind of where we are. But really how that relates to data, so deeply involved in terms of your seismic data analysis and, understanding before you go in drilling whether it's actually viable, and all that's linked back to data. And he talks about in a huge amount of detail, doesn't he? But particularly talking about the value end of it, how that relates to value, how it relates then, of course, to AI, taking us through all these projects. But one of the key things that he talked about, which I just found absolutely fascinating, was this whole thing around kind of who in the organization, who's for it, who's against it. But in some ways, this kind of third element, which most people don't talk about, which is this whole piece around who's undecided, and those people in effect become your kind of delayers. So that's a really important distinction there, isn't it?
He kind of took us inside the boardroom in some ways. And I love that bit where he talked about, what's holding us up? Is it the fear? Is it the incentives? Is it the poor planning? I mean, I hope he doesn't get in trouble for that. Poor planning, or the politics of this stuff. And that is correct. I mean, yes, of course there's politics. The human bits get in the way, and reporting back and talking about failures clearly and honestly is so important. But also I really thought it was a powerful point that he said, we need to be better at telling our stories. We need to be better at explaining what we're up to and why we're up to it, because you are an organization of people. You are, and some people have leading knowledge, some people are enthusiastic, some people held back or are fearful, and therefore you've really got to come together and understand each other and say, look, this is why we're doing it, and this is what we're hoping to do. By the way, you are part of it after all. So really, really good. And thanks, David, for being part of our chat this time. It was really, really good to hear from you. And look, I mean, it worked. It worked. It's amazing.
David's absolutely incredible. I think, the story piece is the one thing, but the other thing that I think was really, really, really incredible was this idea of the relationship between hallucination on the one hand, but also confidence. Because a lot of us would know this. Like, AI comes out confident, doesn't it? Especially generative AI, when you're interacting with your bot of choice. And really, it's how do you navigate that space? In some ways we do know that it is hallucinates, but when it always comes out confident, you've got to find a framework that actually helps you understand, what's the fact and what's not. And I know that's an area that, Lindley, you're, the master of facts.
I know nothing. We have to admit we don't. But no, it's right. And without killing the momentum, making sure that you understand the hallucinations, you understand what you're getting out of it, but also you keep working in the right direction. You cannot do that. You cannot work in the right direction. Things, as we know, will fail in terms of AI projects if you are doing it wrongly, if you're not understanding clearly what's coming out of the back of it.
Yeah, and what's coming off the back of it is extremely important. We also need to take one thing into account here, and that is what's at stake. Because what's at stake determines how much you should be concerned, and how much you should question the outcomes. It's very different when it's something, a choice of hotels or a choice of a restaurant to go to or wherever else. It's very, very different when it's life or death, and you're seeing that more and more in today's world, aren't we? It's filtering into all things, into health, into defense, into things that actually matter. So an absolutely important lesson there and insights from David.
Yeah, thanks, David. Parting is such sweet sorrow, Edosa, but we have to part again. It's time to pack up another episode, but really, really amazing. And it's great to see projects like this that are really working and kind of what you have to deal with to get there. So that's really great. Listen, we'd love to hear from you. As always, we love hearing your stories. We love hearing your ideas and news. So keep getting in touch. You can search us out at AI Values, and we'd love to hear what's going on in your world. And that can be the negative as well as the positive. We need to hear, if we're going to have this conversation, which is, really quite existential for our future in terms of what we do, how we work. We need to hear from you. So please get in touch. We would love to hear what's going on in your world.
Indeed, yes, indeed. The positives, the negatives. But I think more importantly, isn't so much about being extremely one way or the other. It's actually just about being real. And whether that's in your personal lives or in business, that's what matters more so than ever these days. So do get in touch. It's a shame this episode's actually have to come to an end at some point, but really excited about what we've just been listening to with David and looking forward now to the next. And until next time, it's goodbye from me.
Take care.